Welcome to the Baja Brief. We are again with Mariana Plaus, and we have more questions for you, Mariana, this time.
Great. I'm glad.
How are you?
I'm good. You?
All good. We have been seeing many cases now that it's high season. A lot of different scenarios have been popping up, and we want to see your point of view, your legal point of view.
Perfect.
I have this client that compares Mexican taxes with Dominican Republic taxes. I know it's kind of a difficult question because an American client is going to have preferences there, but he really loves Mexico and he likes much more the lifestyle and the geography, everything here in Baja. But he says that he has a zero tax program for 3 years. Do you think there is a way to contrast this option here in Mexico, or is there maybe a misconception of high taxes?
There is definitely a misconception of high taxes. I mean, in Cabo, you do have a higher tax than in other parts of the country. But at the same time, even though you might be foreigner, you're paying the exact same taxes that a national would pay. So a lot of people think that because you're not from Mexico, you're going to pay more taxes, and that is not the case. At least when you're buying or selling property, you're going to pay the same taxes here in the country. The other expenses that may come are expenses that are not taxes, are expenses that are to get a permit, to create your trust, the trustee bank fees. Those expenses are extra because you're not a national, but they are not taxes. So I think that's a misconception that they think it's tax and it's not. And it would be important to see what happens in Dominican Republic after those 3 years. It would be important to see because maybe after those 3 years, you pay actually more taxes than in any other place. Here in Mexico, the property taxes, which would be the annual ones, are very low, are one of the lowest that exists. So I do think it's a misconception. You're going to pay very similar to a national. And also if you buy, for example, through a Mexican LLC, it's also, you're not going to pay the additional costs of the permit, of the trust, etc. So obviously it's case by case, but in general, I think it's a misconception.
I imagine when you have a client here, you present them these kind of strategies, right?
We always advise having an introductory meeting so that we can understand how they want to purchase. They can purchase either by themselves as individuals, which would be through the trust. If they already have an American or Canadian or any other country LLC, they can have that LLC be the beneficiary of the trust. Or if they already have a trust in another country, that trust can be the beneficiary here, or they can purchase through a Mexican company, which is only for commercial purposes. So if you're going to be renting your house, those type of things, that's when we advise that. So that's why it's always important to talk to the clients and not just start working, because sometimes it has happened that I have clients that we are already in the process and we never had the call because they said it was not necessary. And then when we give them these ideas like, oh, well, you could have done this, they say, but nobody told me. And that's because they were not recommended to have the call. So I always recommend agents to push them to have the call with us so that we can understand their needs.
That's really important. This is for the public. You need to have that introductory call, meeting. It's really important because it sets the basis for your scenario, for your case, because it changes every time. Okay?
Yeah.
What happens if the buyer or seller wants to hire their own closing attorney or they want to do the work? I did have a case where an old school guy was trying to do everything by himself. At the end, we have to hire an attorney, of course, but I think we were lucky that we didn't get into trouble. Like I was trying to push, we have to get an attorney until we got it. But how do we explain it to someone that doesn't understand they need a closing attorney?
Well, we need to take into consideration several things. So if the transaction is between Mexicans, it can be more understandable that they don't want to have a closing attorney because it's a very easy transaction. it's always advisable. But in the case that they were very old school and they didn't want to do it, it's because that's the case, because it's both Mexicans. But if we have one person that is not Mexican, then you do need one. And if you don't get it, you're probably going to have many more expenses. Closing is going to take a lot of time and you might not even be able to do it. Why? Because you're not going to have knowledge on how to get the permit from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, how to create the trust with a trustee bank, how to get all the information, the beneficiaries, all of those things. You're not going to be able to do it. Yeah, it's extremely important. I would say it's actually a need to have a closing attorney in those type of cases. Because there are a lot of moving parts in a closing. It's not as simple. We have very simple closings, but generally closings tend to get a little bit more complicated.
What about mortgage financing through a Mexican bank? Have you had an experience with this?
The process is a little bit slower because banks have many requirements that are not needed for us, for example. So because of the anti-money laundering laws and KYC and compliance things that they have, then the process becomes larger or more extended. But it works. It's also simple because the bank is like supervising everything. However, it's very important to consider that if it's going to be through a bank for a mortgage, the bank is going to tell you with which notaries you can work. So that's an important consideration for the offer, because sometimes the seller wants to choose a notary for the capital gain situation. And if the purchaser is doing it through a Mexican bank, the bank is going to tell you, we can only work with these 3 notaries, for example. So that's an important consideration for the offer.
And which bank are you going to choose, right? That's important.
Yeah.
I got even a situation where the offer was made in US dollars, but the bank only wanted to give the credit in pesos directly to the seller.
Yes. That is actually the common practice. So if you have a Mexican bank, they are not going to give you dollars. However, escrow now has pesos and USD accounts. For example, in my case, I bought a property through a bank financing, and what they did is that they wired the money to me, and I wired it to my escrow, and escrow made the conversion immediately. So there you have factors of the exchange rate, for example. In my case, it was in my favor, but it was like a good timing. But in other timing, it could be against you. So the important thing to consider is that the seller needs to get such amount in dollars. So you as a purchaser need to figure it out how you're going to do it. So if the bank is wiring you such amount and that day something happens with the exchange rate, then you're probably going to have to put some extra.
You have just to make sure that the bank is actually going to pay the pesos to your account, not directly to the seller.
Correct. I mean, you do need, I recommend working with, generally when you're going to get a financing from the bank, you first work with a broker that is going to give you the options of which banks are going to give them to you. I recommend working with brokers that are from here, from Baja California Sur, so because they already know that it's through escrow. If you do it with someone that is from Mexico City or something like that, they're not going to understand. And they're going to say, we need to wire the money to the seller's account. So when you do it with someone that actually works here and understands that it's through escrow and that there are a lot of parties involved in the transaction, then they tell the banks from the beginning, like, the transaction needs to be this way, and they do it. So it's not a general thing, it's more an exception. So I do recommend also that.
I'm going to jump to the last question I had actually, because you already talked a little bit about capital gains.
Okay.
So how are they handled in Mexico?
They're not as simple as sometimes people tell us, oh, can I have a capital gains calculation? And they think it's going to be made immediately and just sent. There's a lot of things that we need to take into consideration. So we have 2 options. Either it's 35% of the utilities with deductions, or 25% of the utilities without any deductions. So most people choose the 35% because then they can deduct things. So to calculate your utility, you're going to take the purchase price from when you first purchase, the selling price in which you're going to sell, the inflation factors, how much the land and the construction has updated their value. So we need the deed to see how much was the land and the construction and the purchase price originally. We need the selling price, and we need factors like the deductions that are going to happen. So for example, the commissions, what's going to be the percentage of commissions, if they include tax or not, so that the notary can send us actually the complete capital gains calculation with all the deductions. And after that, we can also add some others. So if you did some remodeling in your house, so it's never a fixed number because you are able to apply some deductions, but we can give you like the rough number.
I think I will even like to make another episode just with an example in an Excel sheet and do like an exercise, you know? It's interesting.
It is.
How complicated is the process for buyers and sellers who are abroad? Is it possible to complete everything without coming to Mexico even once?
Well, I would not advise that. I mean, you should at least come and make sure you're going to buy the property that you want. For example, if you're buying pre-construction, maybe you came 3 years ago, I would advise coming again for the punch list and the walkthrough and make sure that everything is how you want it. Some people don't do that and they send their agent or a friend or something, but there's nothing like actually going by yourself. Theory, you can do it everything from abroad without coming, even if it's not advised. We would need a power of attorney granted abroad. And once we have that power of attorney, then we can do everything from here without the person having to come at all. I mean, it's not advice for knowing the property, but if you already know the property and you just don't want to come anymore for closing, then we actually encourage people to always grant a power of attorney because it's easier for us as lawyers. Otherwise, we need to calculate and match the dates with when they are coming to Cabo, their flights, and then if something happens and they already have their flights, it's a mess because people are already here and closing could not happen. So it's always encouraged to have a power of attorney.
Actually, last week I was at a closing. The seller only sent the power of attorney, and it was so fast, 20 minutes tops, and everything was done so smoothly. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Can you provide a practical summary, maybe a breakdown of closing taxes?
Yes. So for the buyer, you're going to have the acquisition tax, which in Cabo is 3% of the total purchase price. In La Paz and other parts of the state, it's 2%. But here in Cabo, it's 3%. And then you're going to have the registration fees for whatever transaction you're doing. So that is not considered a tax, but it's something that you need to pay the authority. And those are the only taxes that you're going to have to pay. And for the seller, you're going to have to pay capital gains when you're selling, and you have to have the property taxes completely paid before you're selling. So tax-wise, those are the only ones that you're going to have to pay.
Let me get back to the capital gains. Do all notaries process the capital gains the same way?
Many notaries here in Baja California Sur have different criterias for how capital gains can be deducted, for example. So it does depend. Most of them do have the same criteria and most of them apply capital gains the same way, but I could not say that they all do. Some of them will tell you, no, this appraisal, I don't think it's like this invoice for an improvement of the house is not valid, things like that. Like it depends on the criteria of each one. We generally work with those that we know that have a more open criteria and that understand what we're trying to explain. So we don't really have any issues in that regard, but yeah, each notary applies a different criteria to the case.
From your perspective, how can someone identify a good real estate agent?
I think that's easy. You need to have an agent that follows through. I think that's something that I've seen, like as a client and as an attorney, like both sides. I've seen that a lot of agents don't follow through. Like they will give you information and then you ask them something again and they stop answering. So that's one thing, because clients, when they are purchasing property in another country, are very nervous. So, and their agent becomes kind of a friend. So it's important to have like that connection. And also, I think a good agent is one that knows the legal matters of the transaction. I have known agents that have been in the real estate business for years now and still don't know that they can assign a trust, that you can just change it to another name. So like things like that, or they don't know that their clients need to be physically here if they didn't grant a power of attorney. Things like that, that in the end, they just complicate the process, make it more stressful for everybody, also for us. So I think a good agent knows the legal things, like the general things, and is capable of saying you need to go to a closing attorney. Because I also know agents that say, no, it's super easy, like don't get an attorney, things like that. And that's just because they want to sell and convince them to buy fast. But in the end, it's going to be an issue for the client. So I think a good agent is one that knows that it has a lot of complexities, that they need an attorney, that will have a good attorney that is going to be answering questions so that you also look good with your clients and you can provide better
Insight.
better insight of everything.
Yeah, of course. You need to get at least an idea of what it's happening on the table in the technical ways, not only the legal but the financial and the strategic. Because if not, you are not a good advisor for the client, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can the same attorney represent both parties during the closing? What are the pros and the cons of that?
It's very common, especially when you have a very simple closing that is just buyer, seller. And you do need two parties, because if the seller needs to extinguish their current trust, for example, you're going to need someone to make that. So it's very common for one attorney to have both clients, because it's going to be easier, because you're going to be handling all the transaction. The only thing that I would say, it would not be right if it's a more complex transaction where, for example, there is going to be an early occupancy agreement. It's always advisable to have another attorney review what you're doing for the seller or for the buyer, whatever the case is. If it's going to have financing, if it's not a regular closing, then it might be advisable to have a separate attorney. But other than that, it's very common, and it's what most people do here, because you just have everything being handled by the same person. So, closing is going to take place at the same time. You don't need to be coordinating between offices or anything. So I think it's always a good idea.
It works, right?
Yeah, it works.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions for today. If you have any question, please, you are free to ask, and we can make another interview with Mariana just with your questions. Okay, Mariana, thank you so much. We'll be meeting you up again.
Yeah, I can wait for that.
Let's see what the real estate world brings to us.
Yeah,
Okay,
perfect.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.